Good evening to everybody here. I'm really glad for this opportunity to show our love and support from Hope Chapel to your congregation, Dan, in particular. I appreciate you reaching out to me, just so that it's really clear. This is Rabbi Dan's idea, and I don't know if you've ever been in a situation with your spouse in particular or a family member where they say, "Hey honey, what are you thinking?" And your answer is nothing. Rabbi Dan came to me, and I was surprised. Then I felt God's joy in it. I'm so grateful for something that I didn't think of. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the thoughtfulness. Thank you for the initiative, and for the opportunity to convey to you some simple things, maybe in a complex manner, but at the core of it, regardless of what I say, I hope our presence here conveys that we are with you. I am sad about antisemitism rising. I want to be able to convey that we disapprove of that, and you shouldn't feel unsafe. I like that you're here. I want more people to say that we like that you're here. I'm glad that you're our neighbors, and I want to be able to articulate that in a way that comes from Hope Chapel to Tiferet Israel. Like Dan said, my name is Matthew. I'm the pastor of a church called Hope Chapel. And before I speak too much, I want to say that I shared my outline with Rabbi Dan for his approval. But if I deviate from it, he has plausible deniability. He didn't see the whole transcript, so that would not be his fault if I go off course in a way that's not helpful. And to be plain, we are here to show solidarity. I'm going to try to use my words to show solidarity, but our presence here, we are trying to convey love and respect. That's our intention. I'm going to speak on how Christians can support our Jewish neighbors. But like Rabbi Dan said, I'm going to do it from an authentically Christian place. To be friends with somebody requires honesty and integrity, so I'm not going to play hide the ball with you. I'm fairly culty about Jesus. But before I get into too much of that, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. My wife, Mandy, and I, we have 5 children from age 1 to age 15. We're an active foster family. We've had 5 foster children live with us and go back to their families since 2019. We have a placement with us right now, another 1-year-old. So it looks like we have twins, but we don't. And people at the store, for whatever reason, ask me if they are twins. By all appearances, you wouldn't need to ask. Obviously, they're twins. But I like to say, no, she's actually a month older. Just leave it at that. It was a very long labor. And like Rabbi Dan pointed out, we do differ. We have quite a spectrum within the house of Christianity. So just to give you orientation of where I'm coming from, I am what you would call an evangelical and a conservative Christian. I grew up in the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Central Texas in the 90s, which at that time is a lot more like what you would experience from an Anglican church now. It was a lot more conservative in the 90s in the Diocese of Central Texas. When Rabbi Dan reached out to me in the hope of pursuing Friends of Faith, I had at that point not given a lot of time to thinking about Israel and Zionism, just to be honest, of any kind. And so sometimes I struggle with the anxiety of when is Rabbi Dan going to discover that I'm inadequate for the position of a Christian leader in the Friends of Faith movement. But so far he's been very generous with my questions, especially the really dumb ones. We've met multiple times prior to these events, and he was gracious with my questions. One of my questions, which I'll convey to you now, was when you gather on, stupid to say, when you gather on the Sabbath, do you preach? He's like, yeah, I preach. What do you call those? Sermons, regular. Just curious. So then I asked them, okay, preacher to preacher, what's your strategy? What do you do? And I hope this isn't a state secret. Is it a state? Sorry.
It's not.
Okay. So he said, I like to do an H. I make one point, then I make another one over here, and then at the end I connect them. So this may come off kind of like a W because I'm not used to it. But I want to be playful, so I'm going to try my best to do a Rabbi Dan trademark H maneuver, if at all possible. Which is why it's been hard lately when people ask me, what are you going to say? Because I'm actually going to make a point, I'm going to make another point, and then I'm going to connect them. So we'll see how that works. The first point is about confronting hatred. Not being another person's out there problem, but it's something we need to confront within ourselves. So I'm going to convey a story that's kind of embarrassing about my own struggle with hatred. There will be a point to that, and it's going to relate to how they're connected, how Christians can support our Jewish neighbors. But the fact that when Rabbi Dan approached me, I wasn't yet very well versed in the history of Israel. To this day, I have lots of questions, and there's big gaps in my memory of like, okay, what happened when and when? However, I think that my lack of research on Zionism, politically or otherwise, could be an advantage because what I want to do is articulate a reason for why the whole household of Christianity should be supporting Judaism and Jewish people beyond just hardcore Zionists. But before that, I want to embarrass myself and make a confession. The kind I said at first wasn't going to be relevant, but you know the maneuver, so just be patient. Give me 20 minutes. Antisemitism is a form of hatred. Jesus taught his followers, if you're going to confront somebody else for having a speck in their eye, deal with the plank that's in your own first. So I want to talk to us and encourage us, especially the Christians listening, to confront hatred here by the power of God's Spirit. But first, an ugly story. In the summer of, I believe it was 2015, maybe 2016, I was really plugged into the news at that time. Many of you know me, I try not to watch much news now, but at that time I was plugged into a series of tragic events all across Europe, of churches being burned and people being attacked with acid or stabbed by radical Muslims. And keeping up with it intensely and feeling the fear of radical Islam led me in particular, and I'm not putting this on you, to go beyond hating Wahhabi Islam to hating Muslims themselves. It was a thing that festered not overnight, but over a period of time. It certainly spread beyond the boundaries of where it should. I was praying, and I felt God challenge me in this. Even if all of Islam were to gather as one man and tell me, Matt, yes, we are your enemy, and we do want to kill you. Could I submit to Jesus' words in Luke chapter 6? But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, and bless those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you. And the truth was that I could not. I was not walking in submission to Jesus in this, and it broke my heart. At the time, I sought the blessing of the elders of our church to carry out a plan that I felt God put in my heart, to start attending a masjid on Fridays, so that when I'm there with the Muslim men, as a non-participant observer in the back, that I would pray for them and for me. Because it would be, like you said earlier with this physical environment, it would have been a physical, spatial reminder of why I'm there and to pray. I want to pray for these men. I want to pray for God to soften my heart. I attended Masjid Aisha on North Lamar. It's by Brentwood Christian Church and School. Over 18 months, faithfully attending, to the point that it annoyed some of the guys there because they would complain to me, you're not even Muslim. You come every week. I guess attendance is a touchy subject for lots of faith traditions. He was upset with his fellow Muslim. I think due to my hard-heartedness, it took a long time for the Lord to make a breakthrough in my heart. But this is one of the reasons why the people that I read about in Scripture resonate with me. Many of them are profoundly broken people in search of God's mercy and grace. And that resonates with me. Because when I read a hero story of a perfect person, I don't see myself. That's the first leg. Second leg. I want to read a part of this story that you could find in Tiferet Israel, the second scroll. So 2 Chronicles is what I would call it. I don't know if I butchered it. Speaking of butchering it, I'm going to call these characters Joash and Jehoiada. Pardon the redneck rendering. I'm going to be in chapter 22. So this begins with backstory before the main characters go onto the bema, the stage, if you will. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal heirs of the house of Judah. But Jehoshabeath, the daughter of the king, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being murdered, and put him and his nurse in a bedroom. So Jehoshabeath, the daughter of the king, Jehoram, the wife of Jehoiada the priest, for she was the sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah so that she did not kill him. And he was hidden with them in the house of God for 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. There's a lot of names. I got the chance to see them, but if you were just listening, to recap, the king's dead. His sister has to hide her own nephew, the king's son, from their mother, who wants to be queen instead of the normal trajectory of inheritance for the throne, which is not what you'd expect from a grandma, the murder of grandchildren. In the next chapter, we see, in the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself and made a covenant with captains of hundreds. He and loyal supporters of both Judah and God and the royal family are making a plan to make things right. We pick it up in verse 11. They brought out the king's son after they execute their plan, or at least they started. They put the crown on him, gave him the testimony, and made him king. Then Jehoiada and his sons anointed him and said, "Long live the king." Now, when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king, she came to the people in the temple of the Lord. When she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the leaders and the trumpeters were by the king. All the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Also the singers with musical instruments and those who led in praise. So Athaliah tore her clothes and said, "Treason, treason." This was a successful coup so far. Athaliah herself was killed. In verse 16, Jehoiada made then a covenant between himself, the people, and the king, that they should be the Lord's people. And all the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They broke in pieces its altars and images. Skipping ahead, Joash was, the next chapter, verse 1, 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Joash restores the house of the Lord with costly repair work, showing it the respect and dignity it deserved, also supporting and financing this revival of worship of the one true God in the land of Judah. However, we see there a sad foreshadowing of the life of Joash, because he did what was right in the eyes of God while Jehoiada was alive. Continuing in verse 14. They did a lot of repair work. When they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada. They made from it articles for the house of the Lord, articles for serving and offering and spoons, vessels of gold and silver, and they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually, all the days of Jehoiada. But Jehoiada grew old and was full of days, and he died. He was 130 years old when he died. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and his house. Now after the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. Therefore they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers and served wooden images and idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. Yet God sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord, and they testified against them, but they would not listen. Finishing up verses 20 to 22. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, who stood above the people and said to them, Thus says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he also has forsaken you. So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash the king did not remember the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him, but killed his own son. And as he died, he said, The Lord took look on it and repay. I read to you a lot from this story. Just to summarize, Ahaziah of Judah dies. Athaliah kills remaining heirs to become and stay queen over Judah. Jehoiada, a priest, and an influential one at that, and his wife steal Joash away to hide and protect him. Jehoiada gathers loyalists for the Lord and also the kingdom. Jehoiada leads a coup. They install Joash as king. But Joash is only 8. He's too young to really rule. The people are listening to Jehoiada. He's mentoring the nation. Joash grows up and does well all the days of his adoptive father/uncle. Jehoiada dies, and Joash turns. He even kills his cousin, who is his adoptive brother. Jehoiada provided protection for this young man, gave him family, established justice, gave him a throne, and was a mentor and a father figure, provided everything Joash could ever need and want, including his wives. But Jehoiada had 2 weaknesses. Number 1, he couldn't live forever and always be there to guide Joash. And number 2, he couldn't reach into Joash's heart to mentor him from the inside out. Now, here comes the offensive part. I'm going to talk about how a Christian would read this. This informs a Christian view of mankind. The Old Testament, as I call it, or the Tanakh, like I said earlier, is really quite believable because it's not a bunch of made-up hero stories. The authenticity and the realness, even the way it makes Israel itself, like it portrays the good and the bad and the ugly, conveys a sense of realness and believability. If I were making up spiritual stories, I might be tempted to make up hero stories that make me and my tribe look great. When reading this story, the Christian sees the lingering longing for a father figure like Jehoiada, but who will endure, and a high priest like Jehoiada who can turn the people of God, and a king whose heart endures and remains pure, and a high priest and a prophet who can reach unto the inside of a man. And this is how Christians are supposed to see Jesus. And I say supposed to because, like you mentioned earlier, Dan, we're all over the map. And there's a lot of us. And so the map is really big. And the way we diverge from one another is intense. And of course, there's Christians who are cultural, or Christians who are falsely labeled, or Christians who are false in their confession. But generally speaking, we are supposed to believe that Jesus Christ is the rightful heir of David, and a king whose heart is remaining steadfast, and a high priest who continues to live and guide us our whole lives, and a mentor who can reach within. But this, technically speaking, is not separate from God's plans for Israel. This is not an abandonment of Israel, the nation. Because we are supposed to see Jesus as Mr. Israel, Mr. Light of the world himself. A true fulfillment of God's intentions, not a tragic departure and divorce. Like Jesus said in Matthew 5, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." In other words, we Christians are supposed to believe that we are graced with unity with an Israelite, and that we have deep unity with the high priest and rightful king of Israel, the promised seed to Abraham, which means we have a very close connection in our faith traditions. But regrettably, we have not always behaved that way. We Christians have not always treated our cousins in the faith with the dignity and respect that they were owed. And you could point out that, yeah, well, part of that's because there's cultural Christians, or maybe part of it's because there's false brethren, but I'm not exactly sure where or if I even want to attribute blame. But I do know this: Jesus would never have instructed us to mistreat you or your ancestors. So regardless of a Christian's position on political Zionism, it's as plain as the day is long that Jesus, our Lord, would have us bless our Jewish neighbors. It's as clear, as they would say, as the broadside of a barn, that Jesus would want us to root for your best interest. And I feel the hand of God's favor on us to pursue friendship, to pursue mutual protection, and offer respect. Which means, and this is directed to my Christian brothers and sisters, to defend you behind your back as well. To love you as ourselves when you're not around. Back to our passage. Why did I do all the things I just did? Why did I bring up Jehoiada and Joash the traitor? And why did I talk about my own struggle with hatred on the inside of me? Because the struggle against hatred and sin is a deep problem on the inside of us. Rising antisemitism is a battle that includes darkness, not just ignorance. We should fight this together, but like all struggles against evil, it is best fought at a heart level. And for us as Christians especially, we need to start with ourselves. We need to allow God to confront our own mistrust, bitterness, hatred, or perhaps apathy for our Jewish neighbors. And why would I say we should start with ourselves? Just to reiterate, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, "How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a log in your own?" There are many Christians around Jewish peoples. So we have a unique opportunity to challenge our friends, our neighbors, and perhaps most uncomfortably, our family. To challenge them on hatred and or animosity for Jews and Jewish people. But we cannot do that without courage. And true courage would allow God to confront that kind of sin in ourselves. So we are seeking a friendship with you. We are responding to your call, Rabbi Dan. We're not going to follow you all around town, but we want to build up enough social capital so that we could hang out in the future. I don't know if our congregations could go bowling, or if individual people who meet one another at events like this want to spend time off to the side. And I actually believe that after you spoke to us, that did happen at least once or twice. I want to challenge my Christian audience with a few things in particular. Number one, please pray for our Jewish neighbors. I think our culture makes fun of that. Hashtag thoughts and prayers. But as believers in a real God, we actually speak to Him on behalf of our neighbors, expecting that God hears us and cares. This is not a mere platitude for believers. I also challenge my Christian audience. Be brave if you're in a situation that is trending towards antisemitism, or where the rhetoric is ratcheting up in a toxic direction. I'll give just a small example. I do a chess club. Well, it's not real, but I have a chess board at the UT campus. I call it a chess club, but I'm just there. I have developed a lot of friendships with a lot of chess bros at UT campus. When the pro-Palestinian protests cropped up, which, by the way, I didn't know about until afterwards because I've not been watching news, but I was there and I noticed, oh my, what's happening? My chess buddies seemed caught up in it. So when I spoke to them, my desire was first to establish, let me be clear, are you talking about hatred for Israel or Jews or Israelis? Because let me cut you off right there, that's not appropriate. That kind of thing. Now I say that not to brag because it's not that hard when it's friends. It's really hard when it's family. Then to press them, can you even articulate the Israeli side of this conversation? As a super ignorant person, I had to download lectures from a Palestinian person and then an Israeli person because I just genuinely didn't know the talking points. And maybe half the time that's good to not know the talking points from the television, but I needed to spend hours familiarizing myself. And I did, because Austin traffic. But I challenged them. I was like, hey, I want you to do what I did. You seem to know this Palestinian perspective. It sounds like you only know a caricature of the counterpoint. I challenge you to just do it. Spend an hour. Just go look it up. Like I said, it would take a lot more courage to challenge family members. But bravery is essential when we oppose evil behavior. It also requires humility, which is why I think it's especially important that we confront it within ourselves by God's grace. Because when you confront hatred and evil within yourself, you no longer have fantastical and ridiculous notions about how easy it is to just sweep away. I have another challenge, and it's for Jewish and Christian friends alike. Pray for anti-Semites. It's another reason why I shared my opening story. Hatred is detachable from people. It requires choice. But a person and the hatred they embrace are not indivisible. Not by God's mercy. I felt firsthand that perpetrators of evil are both victimizers and victims of the darkness they embrace. I know what it's like to walk in a degraded and corrupted state because of my partnership with God's enemies. Especially those of us who relish God's mercies and steadfast love. we especially need to pray for anti-Semites with sympathy and fervor. Okay, I think I'm done with the challenges. Oh, there's a lot of challenges. I don't know if you were keeping track. Now for the invitation. Tiferet Israel, please let us know, now or in the future, how we can be of any practical support to you. It's a standing offer. You could take it up years from now. I remember when there was a stabbing in New York City at a synagogue. What year was that?
Pittsburgh, 2019.
I think that's the one. Thanks, Bob. And Bob, by the way, took me to the conservative synagogue with several other people from Hope Chapel. And you told the rabbi, we stand with you. And as a Christian, I believed it. I want to stand with them. But I don't always know what to do about it. That's why we have the challenges. Do allow the Lord to confront your own hatred. And do use that as a springboard to confront it in others. Especially when Jewish people aren't around. And we're all over the city. So presumably this should come up at least once for somebody in this room this year. To pray for Jewish people, for their safety and for their peace. And to pray for anti-Semites to be delivered from evil. That they too could see and understand that they ought to bless and work toward the benefit of their Jewish neighbors. That concludes my appeal, but I understand that there may be desire for Q&A.
That was a wonderful talk, both in terms of bringing together your perspective as a Christian and reading that into Scripture and then making it applicable to all of us and what we can do. Yes, so if there are questions that people have for the pastor, if people have questions for me, you're more than welcome to ask your questions about anything, hopefully relating to something he said or the situation that we're in. But yeah, take questions, comments.
What happened to the guy you played chess with? How did that?
That conversation was right before finals. So God willing, starting next week when the chess club reconvenes, I'll be able to follow up with him. I haven't seen him since. Well, not him. It was them. It was a group of young men. I'm also anxious to see if I don't know if those protests have kicked back up again. But like I said, I'm kind of, I live in a cave news-wise, so you may know before I do.
I have a question for Rabbi Dan. Your congregation, have they experienced directly some of the antisemitism that's been hitting the campuses, etc.?
Luckily, we have a wonderful security team here on the campus, so the synagogue itself, we haven't really faced any of that before anything could happen. We have people that deal with that. But I do have congregants that have dealt with it. I was speaking to a woman today, had a learning sessions with a congregant who's thinking about quitting her job because she can't take the harassment anymore. She can't take the toxic work environment, all based on this issue. And she said just the other day, she was on an elevator, a woman gets off the elevator, turns around and yells "Free Palestine" at her. And so she's in a tough spot, and this is happening, and this is in a sort of a scientific work environment. And so this isn't just the kind of thing that's impacting college students on their campuses and where kind of, ideas and rhetoric and all this kind of thing gets thrown around. This is happening at a place of work that is dealing with people that think in a sort of scientific way, that even on that level, this situation has has reached it to the point where she thinks that she needs to find another place to go. And there are other stories of people in my congregation like that.
Rabbi Dan, this is going to be one of those annoying half statement, half question, but it really is a question. I've just noticed in history, there's never been, as far as I'm aware of, there's never been a more precise war than what's happening right now in Israel. And I say that because I feel like Israel's doing everything they can to do it very well, like to target enemies. And I find it a strange thing that something that's flared up to anti-Semitism, from what I've been able to see, because I don't study strange, I read lots of media too much, is that people are very upset and they're accusing Israel of genocide. And it's like they don't know that if that's true of Israel right now, then it's true of every army, at least in the last century, if not for centuries and centuries. So I'm curious, now I'm going to go into some stereotypes here, but some of them are kind of true. A lot of times, media establishments are owned by Jewish people who are wealthy, successful, and so I'm trying to figure out how is it that the major media outlets in the world are covering this in such a way that is so slanted and so unfair to Israel, in my opinion. Do you have any opinion? Do you have any theories on why that is?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is that can easily get to the sort of conspiratorial, sort of anti-Semitic thinking. Sometimes people, it's like the joke about the two Jews on the train, and one is reading the Jewish newspaper and the other one is reading the anti-Semitic Russian newspaper. And the Jew who's reading the Jewish newspaper says, "How could you read that? It's anti-Semitic, it's horrible." And he says, "Well, I used to read the Jewish one, but it was depressing. They're always beating us and they're killing us and they're exiling us. I read this one, we own all the banks and we own the media." I think you want to be careful with that. The other thing that I would say is that just because somebody is Jewish doesn't mean that they are thinking and supporting the Jewish people or supporting the Jewish state. And so just as I mentioned earlier today, the fact that somebody would claim to be a Christian doesn't necessarily mean that they're acting in that way. In the same way, somebody who happens to be born Jewish doesn't mean anything. Like, okay, so he's Jewish, so he's biologically, spiritually Jewish, but that doesn't determine how a person is going to act. That's up to that individual. So I think the fact that something is Jewish owned or has Jewish partners in it or whatever is not necessarily an indication. It's not an indication that it's going to be speaking on the side of truth, and that's true of any group of people.
Sure. Well, I didn't mean to emphasize that the side thing, which could be taken as a anti-Semitic trope, but I was more thinking like, aside from who owns the media, why do you think the media is so unjust and unfair in their reporting about this? I'm just talking about just in contrast to how they report other conflicts. It seems so pointedly unfair.
Yeah,
to me.
I think that there's certainly a very large slant, and I think that there has been a large slant for a very, very long time. I think a lot of people are looking for good stories. I think a lot of people, quite frankly, are just anti-Semitic, and they don't like Israel, and they don't like Jewish people, and they will find every way they can to put down Israel or to put down the Jewish people, and that's, I think, at the heart of it. The double standards that exist in the media, but also in politics. You see the people that in the UN that make up the Human Rights Commission, I mean, it's shocking. And yet Israel is always called out for things, and you have to wonder, okay, well, why is that? Why is it that Israel is being called out for every little thing under the sun, and Iran is on the commission, or Russia's on the commission? And so I think that there's a larger issue here that I would chalk up to, just an anti-Semitic bent, an anti-Semitic leaning. There may be other reasons as well, that but I think that that's sort of at the heart of it. Well, question for Pastor Matt about, I think as a Jewish person, the language of praying for anti-Semites strikes us as very difficult to digest, because there are evil people in this world, from our perspective. There are evil people. We say that when, it says in the Psalms that the Rashayim ein od, the wicked will be no more, right? The sinners will be no more. There is a story in the Talmud that once there was a group of kids that were making trouble in this rabbi's neighborhood, Rabbi Meir, and he didn't like the kids were always making trouble and bothering him and whatever. And so he prayed that Rashayim ein od, these sinners should be no more. And his wife, a woman named Gloria, said, you shouldn't pray that the sinners would be no more, you should pray that the sin be no more. So in other words, the person is not the problem, it's the behavior that's the problem. So we do have this in our tradition as well. But I think that the language of praying for anti-Semites could be a very difficult thing. I remember when I was on a duty station when there was the pullout from Afghanistan. And I was with, an Air Force group, and this had happened, and people were very upset about it. Many of them had served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I remember the Christian chaplain who was there was speaking, and she said, I want to pray for the Taliban. And I thought, this is the strangest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, yes, pray that the Taliban be destroyed. That's what the prayer is. Not to pray for the Taliban. It just struck me as being very, very odd. So I guess my question for you is, what's the line? What's the line that's drawn as a Christian between the behavior and the person? At what point? When you look at Hamas, when you look at the Taliban, when you look at these people who could do these things to other human beings, this is wicked. This is, and from my perspective, these people need to be removed because the world is not going to be safer with them around. And there may be a limitation, certainly to people that have been indoctrinated. And you have to remember that the majority of young military-aged men in Gaza right now have only grown up with Hamas. So there's no other moral conscience to appeal to say maybe this is wrong. If you wonder why a young man can go into the Nova Music Festival and murder Jews, or go into Kibbutz Be'eri and murder Jews in the most horrific kinds of way, and then call his mom and say, guess what I did? You do that if you get an A on a test. He did that when he murdered Jews. And why? Because him murdering Jews is like you getting an A on a test. Why would my parents be mad? This is good. I'm doing the right thing. So when you're confronting that kind of evil, which is so gross and so real, it exists. What is the line, as a Christian, the line you draw when you're talking about praying for the other individual? At what point do you recognize that the distinction between the person and the behavior or the ideology are inextricable?
Thankfully, I have spheres of sovereignty in my mind. There's a domain that the police have that's beyond me. So I like to pray for peace, and I like to have law enforcement at the same time. I'd like to plug a book, actually. It's called Miraculous Movements by a guy named Jerry Trousdale. I'm probably going to get the details a little wrong, but somewhere in the middle there's this kind of comedic story of Taliban with their weaponry sitting in a circle at a prayer meeting because they were recently converted and they didn't really know what to do.
To what?
To Christianity. Sorry, thanks. They converted to Christianity and then at that point didn't have the same purposes and goals in life, but they still had all their weaponry. So they were just kind of sitting like, okay, what do we do now? And but going back even farther than that, we have a rich tradition within Christianity of reading scriptures written by a Christian killer. Paul the Apostle, who persecuted the church to the point of just scaring people so much that even when he converted to Christianity, churches didn't want to let him in their fellowship. They're like, no, we heard about you, and this is a sneaky, Tom and Jerry ploy to come in. We're not going to let you in. So just from me, this is a broad, impressionistic, broad stroke, right? Because I'm really grateful for militaries and law enforcement, right? So, But I just say, I myself, I identify with this passage from Titus 3. Remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men. So there's both there. We want to be peaceable and gentle, humble people, while also acknowledging the reason why the government has weapons. For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. But when the kindness and love of God our Savior toward man appeared, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy, he saved us through the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Spirit. It's a hope. It's not the only plan, right? Safety is important. But my hope is that would be true of Hamas too, at least some of them, as many as possible. That would be true of the young impressionable people caught up in these political movements with rhetoric that they're echoing that they probably don't even really understand or grasp. That's the hope. It's a hope. I want hope. And soldiers. It's just...
Questions for Pastor Matt or for me?
Just one word there, real common word in Peter, it says, "For God is willing that just to say that none should perish. God is willing that none should perish. You know, God is. That's the heart of God, that because He knows who started, where the problem's coming from, the deeper source. You know, the evil. You know, the devil, Satan, that's who we wrestle against. And so that just to say that's the heart of God, but yet people choose, and they're choosing dangerously when they choose, you know, to oppose God.
So I have a question for Rabbi Dan. Like if there was an opportunity to pursue a friendship with some of the members of your congregation, do you have some suggestions or ideas for us individually, what we could facilitate?
Yeah, I think that continuing to do events like this, when you meet people, I think that we'll have opportunities in the future to get together, certainly around October 7th, as it's coming closer and closer. I know that Gail is, I'll just stand up. I know that, you're not as tall as you think you are. In yeshiva I was, but not in the real world. So Gail, I know, is working on something for October 27th that I'll be involved in, but there's also going to be events going on here at the JCC on October 7th. It's an opportunity to get together and to learn about the massacre that occurred that day, to learn about the all of the sort of the aftermath that we're still in right now. So I encourage you to come to these events and to learn about them. And then I think we'll also find opportunities to get together more in the future as we continue to build this relationship with each other. Yeah.
Do you do service activities?
Service activities?
Service to the community?
We do with our kids and things like that, and they do stuff. It could be an opportunity to do something. Certainly, I think to work together, for example, at Israel rallies and things like that, to come together to show your support makes a big difference. Right now, for example, where they're voting all the time on this ceasefire stuff at City Hall. Has anybody been there?
On Thursdays at noon.
On Thursdays at noon. Has anybody been there for one of those?
What do they do?
What are they voting on?
That Austin should throw his hat in for a ceasefire in Gaza.
City Council.
City Council.
The City Council wants to vote on basically the proclamation of association.
Right. Which is exactly what the city of Austin has any business doing. But that's the speaking wheel. But has anybody been there? If you go, and I encourage you to go one time, you can sign up to go on Thursdays, they go, you will see and you will hear for yourself in this community where you live the most horrific vitriol, the worst anti-Semitic things that you have heard since the Holocaust. And it's happening here. And they're doing it believing they are totally justified. So I would say a really good place to start is go see who's there, meet up with people, start making those relationships, and you'll hear it. And you'll be shocked. You'll say, wait, these are my neighbors. These are not strange college people in Berkeley. These are people that live right here in Austin, Texas. And it's not 1935, it's 2024, and it's happening here. So I encourage you to do that. The other thing that I would like to do to work with the pastor on is to start doing some of the education pieces. So the pastor mentioned there may be some gaps in our knowledge of not just Judaism, but of Israel. And then within that, like we have this like whole biblical thing over here, and then you've got the exilic periods, and then you've got, the Inquisition over there, and then you've got, the Holocaust over here, and then the state of Israel in 1948, and then I don't really know what happened, and then 67, 73, and then, so there are all these things that happen, and it's like, well, I kind of want to get my arms around that, or as you mentioned, political Zionism. So what is Zionism? Everybody says, Zionism is bad, anti-Zionism, and this and that and the other thing. And they use it like this word as a sort of a euphemism. It's really what it is. We know what they mean when they say I'm anti-Zionist. And so to learn more about that, what is the history of Zionism? Where does this come from? Who is Theodore Herzl? What was the Dreyfus Affair? Who is David Ben-Gurion? Who are all these people? Why do these people matter? And so I think one of the tools that we want to give the folks here is how to speak about what's going on here in a way where you feel like you've got the facts. Yeah. You feel like you have the history. You feel like I can articulate my feelings. Not just, I feel this way, but I don't really know how to say it. But I can confidently go into a situation where I can give facts and try to sway the other person who may not have those facts. It's very interesting. When Moses is told to go to Pharaoh for the second time, he says, I can't go because I'm of uncircumcised lips. Now, the first time Moses sees God at the burning bush, he says, I can't go. Why? Because I am heavy of speech, heavy of tongue, which means he's got some speech thing going on. But that's not what uncircumcised lips mean. That's a different impediment. The word uncircumcised lips means, God, I have a problem communicating my feelings about the Jewish people because I don't feel confident in advocating for them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's going to ask me questions. Right. He's going to want to know facts. He's going to want to know this and that and this about Judaism. I didn't grow up with these people. I grew up with you. I grew up in the palace, and now all of a sudden I'm the spokesperson for the Jews. I don't know anything about them. I am of uncircumcised lips. I cannot communicate the covenant to Pharaoh. And if I can't communicate the covenant to Pharaoh, he's not going to listen to me. He doesn't care how I feel. So some of us may feel like Moses a little bit. I've got these feelings inside of me, and I have to communicate them to the other side, but I have to do it in a way that they'll actually hear me. I have to gain that confidence. So we want to give folks here the tools to be able to do that. So it's something that we can talk about in terms of some education, and it could be about really anything. Holocaust history. We have Dr. Jake Wolfson over here, who specializes in that. Or about the state of Israel or Zionism or really anything at all, but I think that's something that we would like to do to help folks here have those tools.
It's not a question, but I want to thank you for calling us to bravery. That feels to me to be, a God-inspired thing, and that's not very easy for me to imagine myself in a conversation like you were in with the chess players. But something changed in me once this war broke out, and it felt like it was a call to stand up. Not being an activist, not ever in my college life or my adult life being drawn to activism. Suddenly I felt like there's such a big lie that's just descending. And as a lover of truth, I like to think of myself, I can't let the lie remain. So what can I do then? So this is part of it, it feels for me. But in my neighborhood, I was driving under an overpass, and I saw that someone, Palestinian sympathizer, had put on the columns, 6 of the columns, a sign that said, "Stop the genocide." And then a Muslim woman saying, "We are not the problem." And I felt like I can't let that remain. Like, that's one small thing I can do. So I thought I'll go in the dark of night and pull down those posters. But I scared myself by doing that. So I ended up going in daylight. And all the cars are driving by, but I just felt something shifted in me. Like something has shifted, it feels. Maybe in more than just me. Like this, the idea that "Stop the Genocide" is allowed to be on the column feels like it can't be allowed, and I can be a part of that in that way. So I just wanted to say that this call to bravery, in whatever way that God can show us how to do that, if it's in a conversation or if it's in even a simple act of pulling down a poster that has a hurtful lie, then I feel like that's the time, and that's a good invitation I feel from you to us, and to look for ways to do that, big or small.
I think that there are lots of ways to express that kind of bravery, by the way. And again, you don't have to be Yehoiada, the high priest, who,
There you go.
that's how we say it, who stands up and does something incredible like that. But maybe not tearing down a poster, but maybe putting up a poster. And putting up posters of the faces of the hostages that are still there, because you sure know that the other side of this equation is pulling them down without any problems. Putting up a little Israeli flag by your house lets people know who you are. And that takes a lot of courage, that takes a lot of bravery, especially at this time. Wearing the yellow ribbon to show your solidarity with the Israeli hostages wherever you go. Getting one of the dog tags, which has become a symbol of solidarity with Israel, to bring back the hostages, and to wear that out, and to show people that. All of those things take a lot of bravery. Yes, so Rita has one right there. If anybody has seen those before. To get those as a church, to order them. However you want to do it, and say, we're wearing these because we're showing solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters. Or if that's too much, then to get yellow pins to show that. These are all little things that can be done. Again, you don't have to make a revolution to change the world. As the pastor said, it starts with you. And these are little things that can be done. Obviously, we want everybody to be safe. I don't know, going out and doing that, so do things safely. But these are all very important things that can be done. And it means everything to the Jewish community. When we see somebody on the news or somebody walking around with one of those, we feel an instant connection with that person. It doesn't matter if they're Jewish, not Jewish, Israeli, not Israeli, if they're Muslim, if they're Christian. It doesn't matter. We instantly understand it. We're on the same page here. And all of the other differences that we have just really don't matter. So I encourage you to take those steps of bravery. They're small steps, they're not expensive steps, but they make all the difference in the world. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.